Okay, some information on how I've gone and made this so far. Kind of fun to do. You'll notice it's not symmetrical, which is really nice. And you'll notice I have, a reference image up in the background. So if you set up things, make sure you're going to your unit setup and setting up your unit scales and working to a given unit scale and actually understanding what size you're building. So there's a tutorial on that. Make sure it is followed, part of setting up your scene and setting up your max project, okay? You've got a max project. That's also part of that same video. You don't have it, don't get it graded, okay? So you're going to follow that same thing that we followed all last semester as we built out stuff. So don't miss that. Start from scratch by building your project right out of the gate. Okay, so how did I get this image up in the background? Well, first off, what I find is the way Max works in the viewport, it wants to basically fit it in the back of the viewport based on the width, which means if your viewport is basically wider than it is tall and your image is square, it'll start cutting off the top and bottom. So I extended the width of this. Now I use Fast Stone. It's on the school computers. I right-clicked on it, went to image and said canvas size, give it a background color, and just created it wider. You can do it in Photoshop because this was a square image. You can kind of see the line that was there. So it was cropping the top and bottom. For instance, this wouldn't work very well for the same reason because it's going to crop it when your viewport isn't, when your viewport's a rectangle, it'll stretch it. So we're going to have to worry about that. So in here, what you can do is if you go into your configurations here, you get all these configurations. One, viewport background or Alt-B. So in Alt-B, I'm going to say, we can set it to all different things. That environment background, which is the, the HDRI that I'm using, okay? I'm going to say use file, and then I can say use the file and go and select it. Now I think by default, it's on match viewport, which isn't very good because it's going to stretch the image, okay? It's going to be, completely messing with the image. The rendering output off isn't going to be very good because the rendering output's not going to be correct either. We want to say match bitmap, okay, and have it match that bitmap. And now we can have that up in the background, which is kind of cool, okay? So you can just model against that, which is really handy. And then I added an HDRI. You should know how to do that now with the OSL HDRI environment. And that gets placed into the environment panel, environment effects panel 8 on the keyboard to be able to get some lighting on it if you want. I just picked one of the default. Make sure you're all images are in your images folder in your project before you add them, okay? And then we're going to have to fix them in here, of course, and make sure that they're relative. Now, once again, I have mine set up to be relative by default. Watch the video, okay? Save yourself time and effort. So how did I get some of this done? Let's take a look at the original backpack. So I actually started with a rectangle, a box, and it had 2 segments wide. And one of the things I did is I made sure that I zeroed it out in X, and you could even go in Y and Z if you wanted. And I deleted half of it, okay? Editable poly, right-click editable poly, 4 on the keyboard. I grabbed that, deleted half of it. I added a symmetry modifier, probably vanish, just flip, and slice along mirror plane off so it's not welding stuff that it shouldn't, okay? I also added a shell to give it a little bit of thickness, and in this case, material is pretty thin, so I gave it a 0.1 and a 0.1 inner and outer. You'll kind of see why maybe as you go. And I added a turbo smooth modifier set to iterations 2 and isoline display on so that I'm not looking at more stuff that I don't need to. All the polygons are still there. You can see them all still there. Okay, so I can go down to the end and toggle on show end result right here, and that is alt tilde, so I can toggle that on and off. Somebody asked, how did I make that top panel? Well, if I go and actually delete this, okay, and I'm just going to go in and grab that. So, I've got this shape, and I'm going to make sure that I start shaping this out. take your time when shaping out and getting your shape right. I wanted mine to look like it was sitting on the ground. And work with what you've got to start with. You know, adding the odd edge loop, right? And playing around with these and getting it to look like it's doing what you expect it to do. Do it slowly, do it bit by bit. Don't guess, you know, sort of thing. Don't just make a bunch of vertices. So we've talked about that, or else you end up with a mess. You know, it's Alt 1. I've posted the keyboard shortcuts, so you can start working from there and using those. Now, how do I get the flap that comes over? Well, that's easy. 2 in the keyboard. I'm going to grab that back edge. I'm just going to shift drag it out a little bit, and you'll notice it starts creating it. Okay. And I'm going to go and pull it out some more. And so that I've got that extra little piece there. And I'm going to grab that side piece and pull it out for a flap that's going to come around the side. And start correcting some of the points where they are. Okay. So back to my edges. I'm going to grab that edge and that edge. And I can bring those out and out again and out again. But now a lot of these vertices need to be cleaned up, sort of round out everything, make it make sense. Okay. Don't again, you created a bunch of vertices doing that. Make sure they're all doing what they're supposed to be doing before you move forward. Okay. And so I kept modeling. I needed a lot more than that to be able to get the kind of shape and form, you know, edge loops this way and being able to kind of crush the top in or whatever else. I wanted to have some harder edge kind of looping going on around things here. So I wanted that to be crisper. You know, I wanted the front edge of this to get crisper. Back edge of it maybe to be crisper. You know, so you can add some edge loops, but don't, again, get ahead of yourself. Too much detail like that makes it harder for you to actually do main big shape form things, because you've got all these little tiny vertices now close together, which makes it very difficult to work with. Okay, so don't get ahead of yourself. I'll keep saying it. All right. So at some point, though, I wanted this to be non-symmetrical. And so I modeled a fair bit before I ever got to the point of doing this. But at some point I grabbed the symmetry, right click, collapse to, and now the symmetry's gone, which means I can go ahead and I can, you know, manipulate this, you know, as a whole, right? So now you can see I've got, you know, some symmetrical sides going on. So a couple things you can use to get around that. Again, I'd probably have quite a few more vertices in here, with, you know, edge loops in places, you know, shaping some of this shape out. A couple of ways you can do this, just start grabbing and pulling vertices, obviously. But there's also under freeform, which would cross the top for you, is the shift brush. With the shift brush, this stupid ass thing's going to open up some stupid place. Just dock it back in. You can dock it back up to the top or whatever. You can open that up and yours is going to say depth. Now that isn't bad, but basically this brush is like a big cylinder that passes through the entire model, which can be a problem because if I do it you know, on the front, I'm also doing it on the back and it may not be what I'm after. So if you change the depth to spherical, you'll notice that doesn't happen because it's basically using a sphere-headed brush at this point. Size of the brush is just holding down Control and scrubbing up and down. Okay. But now we could go about, you know, changing this up and, you know, mashing this a little bit and making it less symmetrical if we wanted. Kind of en masse, which is handy, you know, if you want to be able to do things. Now, you can see that vertice from the inside's pushing to the outside. Go and fix it, you know. So this shift brush could give you some, you know, ability to sort of grab and push and pull and kind of, you know, change it up so it's not, you know, completely symmetrical everywhere. That already looks better, you know, just doing that kind of thing to it. So another way you can do that to move things en masse, if you pick a vertice or a selection of vertices, go back to your modeling tab and turn on soft selection. Soft selection will come on and it'll select everything. Now again, I think this soft selection dialog opens down here or somewhere else. God, it's just dumb. Just go, dock it in somewhere close. Now, when you roll over that, it's going to open up some things. So right now, if I move this vertex, it's moving, if you notice, everything, all this down here is moving, but maybe I only want to be working with this lid and not everything underneath. So the soft selection is currently set up by default to be a distance, it's a spherical selected area around it. I'm going to turn on this select by edges and crank up how many edges it's going to travel. So you can see it's no longer selecting down here and doesn't affect it. So it's basically traveling along the edges. And then you can use the weight to determine, what the weighting is. So that can get you some, a little bit more sort of, a little bit more control compared to the grab brush, which is totally valid, but it may not be everything that you want it to do, right? It might be grabbing more than you want it to grab. So move vertices one at a time, whatever you got to do, right? And away you go. So you can go and mash it up. So how did I put the pockets on it? So in the front viewport, so I just hit F and went to front. I'm going to make a box. I'm going to create one right in here, and I'm going to center that as well. So I just zeroed out that value there, and I'm going to pull it out front. Now, something to note with this is because I made it in the front viewport, if we take a look at the local axis, or Alt right click local, you'll notice that Z points out forward now, whereas this one, Z points up. That is something you need to know. So it's under local here. So same thing here. I'm just going to go and grab Poly 4 on the keyboard, delete half. And I'm going to go and add my symmetry modifier, flip it, slice along mirror plane off. And in this case, then, I'm going to go in and conform it. So I'm going to go conform modifier, okay, not the other conforms, conform modifier. And I'm going to pick the bag I'm going to conform to. Nothing appears to happen. Notice how I have a selection passing up the stack. So if I turn that selection off, okay, show end result, it conforms. Turn the selection on, it doesn't. In conform, we can simply say apply to whole mesh. And then take my influence up all the way, so it influences the front and back. Now, something to note when you're doing this is we can't move the front and back around, and you'll see what happens when I do that. You'll notice it starts doing this sort of thing. We got to leave the back completely flat for it to understand where that back face is. Note that when you're working. If you go and do this, nothing works anymore, okay? So we want to make sure we're not doing that. Now, we also want to have a shell on here. So I'm going to just click on the shell, control drag the shell over to this one. And you'll notice it's in italics now. Means that the two shell modifiers are the same shell modifier. I'm going to grab this. I'm going to do the same thing with the turbo smooth. So they are the same turbo smooth modifier. Back down to the stack. And I can go about modeling some of this up to make this pocket, work here. So I'm going to need more vertices to make this, really work well. At least because I'm going to have to get it to conform around the shape. So without some going around it, it's really not going to work that well. Okay, so I can go about the same thing, doing this same sort of process that I did a minute ago with the bag, and I'm just going to grab this edge, I'm going to pull it out a little bit, and then I'm going to pull it out a bunch. I'm going to pull, a side pocket off of that, fix the vertices. You'll notice I'm kind of working out in, sort of space here. And so show end result alt tilde will really start to give you an idea what's going on, or sometimes just turning off conform so you can see what's going on. That is probably the best bet to do things. So I'm just going to go and grab that, pull it down and pull that back up. And I'm going to have that sticking through. So let's go fix that or whatever. And it's going to take a bunch more vertices on there to start making it look good. So there it is there. And, you know, I'm probably going to need some around here to shape it and whatever I'm going to be doing. And again, careful when you grab this back row that you don't do this. You're going to have crazy things happen, okay? It's just the way the conform works. So I can then go in and grab these and, you know, start shaping out. Now, again, at some point, I'm going to look at this and go, well, the backpack in the background that I'm sticking to is not symmetrical. This shouldn't be symmetrical either, so symmetry. And I'm going to go and say collapse 2. So I can work on this. Now I can use my shift brush to move this around, but you got to be very careful. Just show end result, you'll notice that, okay, I've got this problem that's happening. That as I'm shifting it around, you'll notice it's doing that same thing. We're messing up this back, okay? So we're actually changing that back. That's not going to work. Well, something else you can do in the shift brush, along with other things, is I can go freeze axis. Now that's the local axis, so don't mess with the Z. Okay, so now I can go ahead and I can don't have to worry about it, you know, kind of messing with that Z axis. And, you know, I can do some vertex mashing here to get it to fit, you know, maybe a little bit better to the deformed backpack, so it fits in there really nice. Now, it is kind of nice to keep that conform as long as possible, but at some point I might want to just collapse it down. I'd leave the shell in the turbo smooth, okay? So I can go ahead and you know, manipulate this, but what's nice now is I'm still in position where if I go and do any kind of changes, I'm just going to turn off that conform's going to work. But remember, one of the things with the conform is you'll notice it doing this crazy. It's because the actual location of the you know, object is starting inside it. So I'm just gonna make sure it's outside all the time. So if you're pulling this out too much, you know, you're on here and you start pulling this out, it'll start popping as well, and it's because it's popping to the inside of it. You can see it jumping inside. Okay, we don't want that to happen. So there you go. So I'm basically pulling out this pack. Now I need to think about other elements. What would happen if I wrapped a bedroll over the top? How would that affect the shape of the top? Don't get ahead of yourself. Start putting pieces on it. What happens when the straps get pulled tight? What kind of wrinkles are going to be created? Where is it going to pull it down tight and whatnot? So we need to concern ourselves with all pieces, rough it in, and then start going from there. There you go.